Well, thanks for tuning in to the Vanguard Podcast. I'm Zac.
And I'm Gavin.
And today we're joined by the attorney and former progressive Democratic congressional candidate in the Kansas 3rd District, Brent Welder. How's it going today, Brent?
Good, guys. How are you?
Doing well.
Doing great. Yeah, doing great. Thanks so much for your time today, Brent. Yeah, it's great to welcome you back. Brent was one of our very first guests on the podcast. For anyone that's listening that may not have been around at the beginning, I think you might have been episode like 3 or 4 or so. It's really great to see you again, and obviously you're welcome on the show whenever. We really value your commentary, opinions, and experience.
Yeah, thank you. And after the pandemic, we might have to try to meet up in person and do it in person.
Yeah, definitely. We're very excited to be able to start doing live recordings once there's a vaccine out and we can safely orchestrate all that.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess just to dive in here, one of the things that I noticed after the election and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is, over the past number of years, there's been this really successful effort by the Democratic Party to win suburban, affluent enclaves in what would normally be considered right-off red states like Kansas. And, I think there's no better, district than the 3rd or the, Johnson County is probably most indicative of that out of anywhere in the country. Just in 2003, when Thomas Frank was writing about it, it was like a Republican stronghold. And now it's, flipped both for the presidential elections and for Congress the past 2 terms. So I'm wondering, do you think that that's indicative of progress for progressives, or do you think it's a embrace of what I'll call PMC politics above working class politics?
Well, this is a great question. I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about it because it's something I put a lot of thought into. And you're absolutely right. I mean, look at Johnson County. I think maybe Trump even won it last time by a point. And now Biden won it by 8 points, right? And the congressional district was Republican for several terms, and now there's a Democrat. Here's the thing. I think that there is obviously ups to this, to what the Dems have done as far as, building votes in, wealthier kind of suburban areas. However, there is a tremendous drawback to that strategy that I've seen. And what that is, I'm afraid that the Democratic Party has tried to make gains in suburban areas, but has all but ignored entirely exurban areas and rural areas, okay? I actually grew up in a small town myself, a small town of 7,000 people, a few hours north of here in Iowa. And, that is the people in, economically depressed areas, people in rural areas, even people in urban areas that aren't doing economically nearly as well as folks in the suburbs are. That used to be the core and the base of the Democratic Party. The whole point of the Democratic Party was that we were the party of the people, the party of workers. And now it seems to me that has been sufficiently flipped entirely on its head. Which is not only terrible policy, right? Obviously, because we're turning our backs on the very people that I think need protection the most. But I think electorally, it was an enormous mistake, and I'll tell you why. So has this strategy been effective at winning back the House of Representatives by essentially cherry picking districts like the Kansas 3rd to be able to win that back from Republicans? Obviously it has, right? It's because we won back the House. However, the districts that rely on exurban and rural voters and urban voters are a lot of congressional districts, but also statewide elections, okay? And who's running statewide? We have senators, we have governors, other statewide elected office holders, and the presidency of the United States is essentially 50 statewide elections. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is weakening of, the inability to win back the Senate, a terrible situation where we're up against a complete clown president who led us into a pandemic, an economic recession, civil unrest in the streets, and our presidential candidate was only able to beat him by the slimmest of margins, right? I think all of that is directly reflective of this failed strategy by the leaders, the national leaders of the Democratic Party to, try to make gains in the suburbs, which is great, but by doing that, by ignoring, economic populism, economic progressivism that really can win statewide and can win the rural and exurban areas.
Yeah, and do you think that was short-sighted at all? I mean, if you look at the state legislature in Kansas, it's read as, a fire truck, right? I mean, there's
a veto-proof majority, I think, now. So even though we have the governor, they can override any veto, right?
Exactly. And on top of that, we have redistricting coming up where Republicans are going to be coming with knives and pitchforks for a district like the Kansas 3rd to make sure that, even a representative like Sharice is, ousted. And, that goes back to a guy like Kevin Yoder who occupied it beforehand. So do you think that was, even with the gains that they made in the suburbs in districts like the Kansas 3rd, do you think that those are temporary? Do you think that'll backslide after redistricting?
Well, I assume that if the Democratic Party continues to go down this strategy, that, essentially they'll still stay strong in the suburbs, right? Now, yes, redistricting is going to be a problem, but the question is, do we have to give up on exurban and rural voters and urban voters in order to attract suburban, votes? And I think largely the answer is no. I think that there's different things motivating different voters in the suburban areas, at least from my experience running for Congress here and living here, is that suburban voters are, they're not, more so, they're not worried about where their next meal is coming from. They're not worried about being able to make the house payment or the rent payment as much. Of course, there are a lot of people that are. It gives them the ability to worry more about social issues and social progressivism, which is entirely important and which the Democratic Party is leaps and bounds better than the Republican Party on, and progressives in general are even better than all of that, right? However, why do we have to either turn our back entirely on economic progressivism, or what I also see happens a lot is candidates sometimes will actually adopt a progressive issue, but then keep it a huge secret, right? I feel like Hillary Clinton did that in some instances, and Joe Biden, for instance, actually has endorsed a $15 minimum wage, which is absolutely fantastic.
When he lost Florida.
Well, exactly, right? And so the very idea that Joe Biden, of all people, has adopted $15 minimum wage, I think is really a sign of strength among progressives. However, he didn't talk about it, right? And luckily he squeaked through this time. But I think we need more candidates on the statewide level, at all levels, talking about, both adopting the progressive issues, which doesn't happen nearly enough, and then actually running campaigns on it, which was what I did when I was running for Congress here.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great segue, Brent, into another topic that I really wanted to get your reaction to, which is the recent election results in the state of Kansas, specifically the Senate race. Barbara Bollier, who lost the Senate race to the Republican, a pretty generic Republican option. Obviously not the craziness of like a Chris Kobach or anything, but still, Barbara was not able to win that race despite a lot of hype from the Democratic Party. Endless articles written about how a woman could win, a female Democrat could win the seat of Kansas for the first time in all these years, and all this stuff. What do you have any critiques or commentary on the kind of campaign that Barbara ran? And what kind of campaign would you have run? Were you the Democrat running for that Senate seat? I personally was kind of hoping you would throw your hat in the ring.
Well, thank you. So Senator Bollier, who is a state senator still, so I'll refer to her as Senator Bollier. She just switched from, and I'm sure you guys know this, but it's important for your viewers to know as well. She's actually never been elected as a Democrat to anything in her life, right? She switched a couple years ago after the election from Republican to Democrat, which is great. I wish every Republican would switch to Democrat. I don't have any problem with that. I even put out a tweet at the time that said, hey, welcome in, but now we're expecting you to actually act like a Democrat if you're going to be in the Democratic Party. And from what I saw in her campaign was that her core message was, well, I'm not adopting a whole host of progressive stances. I honestly don't know what her message was other than that. Clearly, she wasn't really attacking Trump because Trump won Kansas pretty big. I got mailers, because obviously I'm a voter here in Kansas. I got mailers from both her and her allies. And this is actually interesting. So I remember one mailer in particular, it pointed out three things that she was going to do. And one of them was Okay, now I don't want to get it wrong. I have to remember back, but it was essentially, she was going to protect Obamacare. She was going to like protect something else. I can't remember what it was. And then she was going to make education better. But what I noticed was, the first two things of protecting things or fighting against, defending them from Republican attacks, that's not actually saying you're going to do anything. It's literally just saying you're going to keep things exactly the way that they are. And then the third thing was this kind of generic idea that we're going to make education better, which, is an important issue in Kansas. But also, I heard her talking about, and I think I even saw some ads about her specifically saying, oh, well, I am not for Medicare for all. I am not for the Green New Deal. Well, you know what? I consider those to be extremely popular stances, not only in the 3rd district, but statewide, and progressive, populist progressive issues that I think if Democrats start focusing on those issues will actually increase our vote totals in exurban and rural areas, which is unfortunately, I think, the opposite of what the conventional wisdom is at the top of the party in Washington. But I think these exurban and rural voters, they, if they're given the opportunity to vote for a candidate who will fight for them, who will increase their wages, who will make life a little bit easier for them and make it easier to pay the bills, then I think that it will be much harder for voters to be wooed by candidates like Donald Trump and whoever the next Republican that comes around is, that tries to just win over their vote with divisive racial division, racial politics. But if the Democrats aren't offering anything to them, or even specifically going out there and the messages that they're advertising to those folks are, we're literally not going to change anything, and these people are struggling and the economy is depressed and we're in a jobs crisis, does it really surprise anybody that they're going to, go vote for the Republicans?
Well, it seems to surprise the Democrats, right? Because they've continued to learn nothing. You had, former, Gavin and I are in Kansas City, Missouri. Our former Senator Claire McCaskill went on television and made a fool of herself in a pretty disgusting fashion. Right after that, you have, just like you mentioned, with Barbara Bollier, John Ossoff in Georgia is following a very similar kind of campaign style. There was the video that made circles in left Twitter of, do you support the Green New Deal? No. Do you support Medicare for all? No. Do you support defunding the police? No. Just like none of these tangible things. Well, what do you support? Oh, I'm not Donald Trump. I'm not, this other terrible, thing that this monster that we've created.
Or Nicole Galloway here in Missouri similarly ran a very like milquetoast kind of campaign, allowed the Republicans to, constantly go out. I'm not for defunding the police. I'm not for this. I'm not for that. Like, you're kind of just giving into their framing by, saying, I'm not for these things. And I mean, that's kind of what they want you to do. Because then it's like, well, why are you saying you know what I mean? So I think that, yeah.
If your message is the Republicans are better on the issues,
yeah,
then why on earth would they vote for a Democrat, right?
Like, why would you vote for a diet Republican if you can get the real thing?
Yeah.
And I guess to follow up and ask, one of the things that, and I don't want to be like, class reductive. Obviously, people vote outside of their own class interests for a whole host of reasons, just like people don't vote because of their, religion or race or anything else 100%. But it definitely seems to be one of the prevailing motivating factors. And I'm wondering what you think the Democratic Party can do, if anything, to continue to both court this, professional managerial class of voters that occupy a lot of these suburban enclaves, like we've mentioned the ground that they've recently made, without abandoning the working class like they've seemingly done, when at times the class interest of those people just aren't in tangent, right? Like it's going to require the opulent paying a higher share of taxes so that we can make sure that everybody has healthcare. That's just the way it is, right? So how do we make sure that the working class interest is represented alongside that more professional class interest?
Yeah, and obviously there are going to be certain instances where, like you said, where those two classes of people are going to be at odds with each other. I do think what I find is that suburban voters are more motivated by social issues than economic issues largely, and are certainly willing to vote for a Democrat that's good on race issues and civil rights issues compared to a racist Republican, for instance,
sure.
Right? But as far as reaching out to the exurban and the rural voters, I think that there's still a way to do both. I'm trying to remember, I think it was it Senator Schumer who said, well, for every, one voter we lose in a rural area, we're going to gain 2 voters in this, wealthy voters in the suburban area. But that doesn't make any sense, right? It comes down to math, because I think 2/3, there's twice as many people in this country that, for instance, do not have college degrees than do. So, you were alienating 2/3 of the country. So how on earth, one, why would you do that? 2, if you were going to do that, how on earth could you argue that you're going to win 2 suburban votes for every 1 rural vote that you lose? It really, to me, seems like quite the opposite. For every 1 suburban vote you gain, you're going to lose 2 rural votes, if you're going to break it down to that, for every person, if it's directly connected. I think there's actually a way we can do both. But the Democratic Party at the national level and at most levels isn't doing that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, Brent, the last time we had you on this podcast back in June, I believe, you told us a little bit about a legal case you were working on involving a family of a victim of COVID. Do you have any updates to share on that case? Is there any progress that's been made? I remember at the time you said it was potentially a groundbreaking case. So just wondering if you had any updates to share with us.
I do have an update, and what I can say is that there has been a settlement of the COVID-19 workers' compensation death case, and that all the parties are satisfied with the outcome. I unfortunately, that's about the most I can say on that specific case. Now, I can certainly talk about COVID-19 litigation in general. We actually, my wife and I, are wrongful death and personal injury attorneys here, and we actually represent other families as well who have had loved ones die of COVID-19, and we're representing them in their death claims. But yeah, thank you for asking. So that's the update.
Cool. Well, also on the subject of law a little bit, I just want to get your reaction to the Trump administration's many lawsuits and legal challenges of the election results. Obviously, I have no experience or knowledge in the field, but even to me, most of these suits do seem pretty bogus. What's your reaction?
Well, yes, they are bogus. I mean, I think it was the long and short of it. I guess you technically never know what the Supreme Court will do, because it seems to be becoming more and more political every year. However, I don't even know that any of his lawsuits, even if he were successful, that they would necessarily even change the vote totals of any state. So I think it's completely absurd and completely ridiculous. And going back to the COVID litigation, there has been a big update in Missouri, which is, and actually I just got a kind of a breaking news alert from the Kansas City Star about 30 minutes ago that, and I knew that this was coming. The Republicans in the legislature are going to try to pass, and probably will be successful, honestly, to try to pass legislation shielding businesses from their negligence that causes people to be killed or injured from COVID-19. This is something that has already passed in a lot of other states. I know, we represent a family in Iowa of a meatpacking plant worker who was killed due to the negligence and recklessness of his employer. In Kansas, unfortunately, the Republican legislature passed, and Democratic Governor Laura Kelly signed this type of legislation. And what this does, it's terrible for public health. It puts us all at risk, because what it says to the businesses is they don't even have to take the reasonable care. Like, they don't even have to follow the CDC guidelines. And if they don't follow it, and if they don't take reasonable care, and then somebody can prove, like if my wife and I, or another attorney can prove that yes, this person contracted it at that business, and it was due to the negligence of that business, still the business gets off scot-free. And so what it does is it just incentivizes businesses, giant corporations, to make everything dangerous for their workers, to make things dangerous for their own customers and their own consumers, and it changes the law and makes it more dangerous at the time that it's literally the worst possible time, during a global pandemic, right? So we're actually letting businesses off the hook during the time that there's the greatest risk, which is terrible.
Unconscionable. Yeah. I mean, I can't say I'm surprised, right? I this is the kind of thing that we've just become so accustomed to, but it does kind of leave a feeling in your stomach when you start to think about all those families that are gonna, be without, any sort of compensation, basically left high and dry in the midst of a pandemic, economic crisis. I guess, it's a broad question, but what kind of resistance would you like to see from people, and what kind of pushback from workers can we, orchestrate to make sure that these companies are held accountable and that they can't just exploit their workers, put them in harm's way and then get away with it and wash their hands of it?
That's a great question. And, my answer may sound somewhat disappointing, but is also true, and people need to start realizing that largely the die has already been cast at election time. Right. And I mean, this goes the same with, Joe Biden, people, everybody that's supported Joe Biden and got behind him and any other candidate that anybody votes for. If you're voting for a candidate and you're hoping to change them after the election, I think that is largely, outside of some rare circumstances, largely a fool's errand, largely not going to happen. Right. I would love to, believe me, I'm a former union organizer. I was the former national field director for the Teamsters Union, among other things. I've been a labor lawyer for years. I would love to be able to say that, we could get 1,000 people, 5,000 people, 30,000 people outside of, the Capitol building, in a socially distant way, of course, demanding, that the legislature protect us, demanding that the legislature make sure that our communities and our people and our workers are safe at the time that it is most important during a global pandemic. But you know what? Honestly, I think that the chances of that happening are extremely, extremely slim. And if we're going to continue to elect people, whether it's Governor Parson, whether it's Republicans in the legislature, no matter who it is, right? If it's corporate Democrats, if we're gonna be electing people on election day that are not going to protect us and not going to stand up for us, or people, even Democrats that are going to sign this type of legislation into law, then we're going to have to live with those circumstances until the next election. And I urge people to adopt the same rule that I have for myself, which is, I decided many years ago, I'm never, ever going to vote for a corrupt candidate again. I think that's a pretty low bar, right? I'm not even asking that they're like this super great candidate or even have pledged to stand up for us or anything, but at the very least, I'm not going to vote for a corrupt candidate. And unfortunately, we have way too many corrupt individuals in the Missouri legislature for me to have any hope that they're going to do the right thing. I assume that they're going to pass this bad law and put us all at risk.
Well, speaking of corporate corruption in the major parties, you were one of the delegates who voted no on the DNC party platform a while back, a couple months ago. Was a big story at the time. It seems like obviously so much has happened since then that a lot of people probably don't really remember what was going down at that point. But can you just remind viewers why so many delegates made that decision to vote no on the party platform, and also just a little bit about your own feelings on the state of the Biden-Harris administration, which is now ascendant as Trump is on his way out?
Yeah, so I was on the DNC platform committee in 2016. I was a Bernie nominee, and then this time around I was on the DNC rules committee. And so in 2016, I was the one that put forth a proposed amendment to get basically dark money out of politics entirely. And then this time around, I put forth some anti-corruption amendments to the rules committee, among other things, to ban corporate lobbyists from the DNC, to try to get the DNC to adopt a rule permanently rejecting corporate PAC money from its own, organization. Unfortunately, they not only voted down the anti-corruption amendments that I proposed this time, but they literally rigged the vote in the actual rules committee meeting. I'm not even joking. I've talked about it extensively on Twitter. There's been articles written about it, a Sludge article, some others. You can look it up and see exactly what they did. But as far as the platform committee this year, also I am aware of what happened. Is that most progressives, if not all of them, that had a vote, voted against the platform because it didn't include Medicare for all. This is the Democratic Party platform. First of all, the American people support Medicare for all. When you look at polls, overwhelmingly, Republican, Democrat, Independent, the American people support Medicare for all.
Yeah, Fox News had a real jaw-opening moment when they were reading off the polling reports on election night, I remember.
That was great. That was fantastic. And not only on Medicare for all, but on a whole host of other
issues. A bunch of issues.
So, not only do the American people support it, but an enormous amount of the Democrats support it, right? I mean, this has been shown in every poll. I did polling even during my congressional race, in my Kansas congressional district, and it was clear Democrats support Medicare for all. Democrats support single-payer healthcare. So why on earth would it not be in our national party platform? The reason is because the national leaders have made a bad calculation and a bad strategy, thinking that if we support free healthcare for people, that people are not going to vote for us.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Absurd. Brent, one last question from me that I had before we let you get away for the night. As somebody who lives in Missouri, right? I'm a Kansas City, Missouri resident now. I spend a lot of time thinking about Josh Hawley and his sort of ascension in the Republican Party, right? His sort of faux right-wing populism that he's become sort of nationally renowned for. And one of the reasons he continuously makes headlines is he's one of the few senators that's positioned themselves against big tech in a big way, in a big, meaningful way. At least for the Republican Party in this like new sort of new right that they're envisioning, I guess, if you want to call it that. The Democrats, it seems, haven't been able to get it quite together in effective messaging on we're going to go after big tech. And I'm wondering if the left should be pushing for a kind of big antitrust busting move where we not only go after big tech, but we also go after big ag, which is the connection that I think Josh Hawley makes that's really compelling for a lot of people in the heartland, because farmers are getting crushed by these big agriculture conglomerates. It's almost impossible for them to make a profit unless you're, one of these huge industry leaders. So I'm just wondering if you think that that's something that the Democrats could be pushed to embracing, or if you think that that might be some place that they lose ground to the Republicans.
I think almost every multinational corporation has too much power in our government and, in our democracy. And I say multinational corporation because a lot of these corporations, they're literally not even American corporations. Like they want the tax benefits of, putting their corporate headquarters, in the Caymans or wherever they claim to be. Well, in that case, they're not an American company. So to the extent that anybody even believes we should be giving, handouts or economic incentives or whatever they want to call it to American corporations, why on earth should we be giving anything to a foreign corporation that's not even an American corporation, right? And ultimately, we need to get back to the days where our leaders, the Democratic Party certainly, is standing up for and supporting workers. Because you know what? The CEOs, the billionaires, they already have good lives. They're doing just fine for themselves. They are oftentimes cheating the rest of us, right? They're cheating their own workers. They're cheating the consumers. They're cheating the public health by dumping chemicals into our drinking water and the air that we breathe. And they're victimizing everyone, every which direction that they turn. And so why should we be fighting for them to be able to do that more when we could instead be fighting for the people, the workers, the consumers, the public? To me, it's so obvious that that's not only great policy, but electorally, it's extremely important as well. And that's been one of the key things that I've fought for throughout my career, that I was fighting for during my campaign, and that I continue to fight for, and that I hope the Democratic Party will wake up and see that people want leaders that will stand up for them and not just giant, faceless, nameless, oftentimes, foreign corporations.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with that approach. And I think that your observation is so prescient in that sense. Brent, I think that your Midwestern brand of leftism is just such a model for kind of selling progressive ideas to communities that might not be convinced already. And just as a last question, just wanted to hear if there was any plans that you or your wife, Christy, had to run again. And also, If, Nick Brana and the People's Party came knocking, would you consider running as a third party, like a People's Party candidate in the future?
The People's Party has come knocking. Jimmy Dore has invited me personally. I also had a good probably half-hour personal conversation with Nick. And I think what they're doing is great. I really do. I think, obviously that I'm completely supportive of the same issues that they're pushing for and everything. I haven't quite, gone that extra step of joining their new party or anything, but I do think that the activism that they're working on is extremely important. And, any organization that has, Cornel West and Nina Turner speaking at their convention, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
By the way, it just occurred to me too, as I looked up and saw myself on here, we've never even addressed for your viewers the fact that, I really, really wanted to join you guys from a super fancy, nice place. So I decided to do the Four Seasons, but through this terrible snafu, I ended up here in the parking lot of Four Seasons Total Landscaping.
That's wild.
Man, we could hardly tell. I think if you squint really well, it looks like a robust 4-star establishment.
Man, when you compare, I don't know if you guys remember watching Donald Trump's announcement of his presidential campaign, what was probably about 5 years ago.
Yeah,
now.
was that when he came down the escalator?
It was the most ridiculous thing that I've ever seen in American politics, honestly, probably. Well, aside from everything he's done since then.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that that's how he began his campaign and that he ended his campaign in the parking lot of Four Seasons Total Landscaping is, to me, just, poetic justice.
Hopefully his only campaign. Let's hope that he doesn't announce for 2024.
Well, if he does, hopefully the Democratic Party will wake up by then, because, I don't think the national leaders have largely, unfortunately.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that front. We're woefully underprepared to, beat back the rising Trump faux populism that, as Zach alluded to, is also manifesting in the form of very nefarious characters like Josh Hawley and of course, all the Fox News goons like Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, who knows who could make a run for it and frankly be successful, because as you said, Donald Trump's entire presidency has been a fucking farce. And here we are, he's still the most popular Republican in the entire party, easily with his voters. So I think you're absolutely right. The Democratic Party needs to really wake up to combat that, or else we're screwed.
Oh, and I have one last thing, to kind of bring it full circle from something we talked about at the beginning, where I mentioned, we're in the middle of a pandemic that was largely avoidable. We're in the middle of an economic, recession. We're in the middle of civil unrest. And does anybody think that if it weren't for the pandemic happening, that the Democrats would have been able to beat Donald Trump? I mean, we barely beat him as it is with all of those things happening. And what does that say about the people running the Democratic Party from the national level, that it's so obvious to, I think, literally every person in America, that had the pandemic not happened, then Donald Trump would have been reelected.
Landslide. Yeah,
would have been devastating.
Yeah.
We appreciate your time so much today, Brent. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to have you back on soon to keep kind of talking politics.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.